everybody, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of Hey Paul. This week, Jennifer says, "Hey Paul, what's the best material to use when molding and casting Super Sculpey or other polymer clays?" That's a great question, and it's actually a simple one. Anything. I mean, you can use something as simple as Play-Doh if you wanted to, or any kind of the silicones that are out there, or mold-making materials. The bigger question that you need to ask yourself is, what is it that I'm going to cast? I'll break this down for you in a way that's easier to understand. First, there's three terms that go with molding and casting that you need to know, okay? So the first one is going to be here. That's your master, okay? The master is going to be the main sculpture, the original piece that you make, all right? That's your master. The second term is going to be the mold, okay? Or the negative, and that's going to be the piece that you are creating so that you can make multiples from it. That's going to be the negative version of the master sculpt. And the third one is going to be your cast or your positives, not to be confused with the master, but your cast pieces or your positives that come out of the negative or the mold, okay? So things like Super Sculpey or polymer clays are pretty closed. I mean, if you put a lot of texture into your sculpture, you'll end up needing to use some sort of release agent, but I find that for the most part, if you're casting or molding it with a silicone or any kind of mold rubber, you typically don't even need to use a release agent. But if you do, one of the easiest things that you can use for a release agent is you can buy a spray such as Man's Ease Release or Universal Mold Release, or you can use Vaseline that you thin down a little bit with some isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol, that you can buy it anywhere at the store. You just need to put basically a barrier between the object that is being molded and the mold material, or the objects that are being cast and the mold material. Okay, and that's just going to allow for easier release once you're done making the product. All right, so when we're talking about polymer clays, we're talking about just regular straight sculptures that you've created, and these are going to be cooked and baked versions of the polymer clay, of the Sculpey. Okay, you can't mold uncured polymers because the polymer that is inside the clays are going to have an adverse reaction to the mold making material. Another thing that you need to ask yourself is if the final pieces that are going to come out of it, the cast pieces, are they going to be rigid or are they going to be flexible? Okay, are you going to be making pieces that are made out of foam or rubber, or are you going to be casting pieces that are going to be rigid, like sculptures made out of something like a 2-part epoxy resin? Okay. The general rule of thumb with mold making is that if you're going to cast rigid pieces, you need to mold with a flexible material. If you're going to cast with a flexible material, you need to mold with a rigid material. All right. Typically, when you are molding Sculpey or polymer clays, you need to use a soft, flexible material so that allows you to pull the master out when you are done. A lot of times, if you've got hard undercuts, like my chin here would be considered an undercut, you'll end up either having to bend the material, the mold away from it, or you're going to end up breaking your master, okay? It comes with experience and time and practice to be able to either create a multiple part mold, 2-part mold, 3-part mold, 4-part mold, or to be able to cut the line through a box mold to be able to know exactly how to pull your master out without damaging it. A lot of times, since we're working with polymer clays, they're a little bit more fragile than a cast piece, like Smooth On 300 or something like that, which is going to be more of a rigid material. That's going to be for your casts. Typically, those will come out of a mold a lot easier because they are a solid piece, whereas when you have something like the Sculpey, it has a tendency to be a little bit brittle. So, Jennifer, to answer your question, it's not so much what it is that you're sculpting, what you're going to mold with. The mold material itself can be pretty much anything. The big question you need to know is what you're going to do after you're done molding it. But a couple of mold materials that I strongly recommend. There's a mold putty that's made by Alumilite. There are mold rubbers that are available from Smooth On. I strongly recommend any of those. They all have tear strength, which is the amount of flexibility that the object, the mold material, will have before it tears, and the amount it has before it loses its shape overall. So you need to know that. If you've got a lot of undercuts in your sculpture, you want to use something that's got a little bit more flexibility to it. But if you're making a mold of something that's got a lot of undercuts and it has to be really flexible, you need to make sure that there's a hard, rigid box around the mold itself to help it keep its shape. Hopefully that answers your question there. If you have any further questions about this, feel free to drop me a message down below, leave me a comment, and I'll be happy to answer them. If you've got any other questions for Hey Paul, just go ahead and leave them to me at the email address that you see right here, or you can leave it in a message below. Hopefully that takes care of everything. Remember to work smarter, not harder, and I hope you learned something today. I know I did. Take care.